welcome to our first webinar of the Arthritis and Lupus Awareness Month for 2024. So happy to have you all today, and thank you for making the time to be a part of this really special webinar. I'm Emily Boyd-Storman. I'm the CEO of the Arthritis National Research Foundation, and am so very pleased to present our two presenters today, who I think you're going to learn a lot from. This month, we're celebrating Arthritis and Lupus Awareness Month, and this year's theme is Strength in Every Step. And it's our goal to empower the community with fresh resources and tips every day in May. So with that, I want to just thank our corporate sponsor, Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. Thank you for their support of all of this month's activities. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring webinars like this forward today and the continued programming that we have. So thank you to them for their support. And now I'd like to present our first presenter today. So today we're going to hear from two leaders in the gut microbiome community who will really help us to understand how this affects those living with arthritis and autoimmune disease, excuse me, and what you can do to set yourself up for success. So as we get into today's presentations, I just want to make sure that you know if you have any questions to put those in the chat, the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end of each presentation. So today we're going to start with Dr. Renuka Nayak, who's an assistant professor at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Nayak is not only an accomplished researcher and clinician, she is also one of our own scholars. She received a grant from the ANRF in 2020, and she currently sits on the ANRF Board of Directors. So I'm pleased to welcome Renuka today and have her talk about her experience and her research in this world. Welcome, Renuka.
Oh, hi. Great. I'm glad. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me present this talk looking at the microbiome. I'm kind of going to give a big picture overview of the microbiome and how it might affect your health and arthritis. And so this is just a picture of a rainbow over Ocean Beach, and I kind of like to start with that positive message. So I actually don't have control over my slides, so I'm going to ask, yes, wonderful, to advance the slides. I have no disclosures. And today we're going to talk about the microbiome. I really do like to define what the microbiome is because this is a new field and definitions are evolving. And so when we talk about the microbiome, when I talk about the microbiome today, I'm talking about all the microorganisms like bacteria, archaea, fungi, and viruses that live in or on an environment. It's not just them, but also the genes that they bring with them. And that's what that little red and blue circle is. It represents not just the genes. Yeah, there you go. Their genomes and the microbes. And so we've come to appreciate that microbes reside in a lot of different locations. So in that first human figure over there, you can hit one, advance the slide one more time. There we go. There's microbes that live in and on us. So there's microbes on our skin, in our mouth, in our gut, in our nose, in our ears. They're everywhere. And some of them actually help us. And I'm going to talk more about how they help us in the next slides. But microbes live in other environments too, like in the ocean and in the soil. And what we've come to appreciate about these microbes is that they and their genes really influence the environments and the organisms around which they reside. So go ahead and advance the slide. And so with that kind of just definition of the microbiome, given the fact that they live in and on us, they interact with a lot of our body systems. And when we talk about arthritis, you know, a lot of my patients will ask me, well, how do I make sure that my microbiome is healthy and that I eat the right diet? And I also like to explicitly talk about how the microbiome influences our immune system, because we know that sometimes arthritis can result as a consequence of an abnormal response of the immune system. And so I'm going to have you hit advance one more time because there's two other arrows. There we go. So this slide is meant to show that like diet that a lot of my patients ask about can influence microbes. So of course, when we eat food, right, our microbes see those nutrients first. But they can also, diet can affect our own cells and our own immune system. And so that's where those arrows from diet go over to microbes as well as the immune system. Then microbes can act on the immune system and cause the immune system to either ramp up or decrease in intensity, but the immune system also was designed to act on microbes. And so the main point of this slide is just to say that there are a lot of these bidirectional interactions between diet, the microbiome, diet, and our immune system, between the microbiome and our immune system. And so this is fairly complicated, all these interactions, and we're starting to uncover, how these interactions work so that we can leverage that information to advance treatment of arthritis and to advance health. And so that's what, foundations like the ANRF are supporting researchers that are looking at all the sort of fine nitty-gritty details of how these interactions work. And so, maybe one big picture comment that I want to make is that we still don't understand all these complex interactions. But while we're kind of figuring out, there are certain things that I still like to talk about with my patients in terms of how diet and the microbiome can affect their health. And so with that, I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide. In the meanwhile, while we're trying to figure out all these like complex interactions between the microbiome, the immune system, and diet, there are certain things that I want all my patients to know, which is that we really need to take a holistic approach to your well-being as an arthritis patient. And so, I encourage my patients to work with their healthcare team, stay in communication with what's going on. You don't always have to wait in between visits, to tell us what's going on. We like to hear from our patients if they're doing well, if they're flaring, if they're not feeling so hot. Exercise. So I know it's really hard as arthritis patients to exercise. Like you may not be able to do those things that you were doing when you were younger, but I love to talk to my patients about their programs like Sit and Be Fit, where you can do seated exercises or pool therapy. And that movement really helps the joints and your overall well-being. Healthy eating, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. And I know the next speaker will also spend a lot of time talking about healthy eating. I do encourage my patients to get enough rest because sleep can really affect how we feel during the day and how we perceive pain. And then mindfulness and meditation, we're appreciating as a community how important this strategy can be to kind of address some of the pain that we experience as arthritis patients. So that's kind of like even a bigger picture, holistic, view of approaching your well-being. So I'm going to have you go to the next slide. And so now we're going to jump right in looking at how diet impacts the microbiome, how the microbiome impacts the immune system, and how this all plays out in terms of arthritis. Next slide. So how do we know that the microbiome is important in human health? And so what I'm showing you here is an isolator. That's what that bubble is here. You probably can't see my cursor, but in that little bubble is a mouse. And what is cool is that we can actually get rid of the microbiome in these mice. So that's, the question is like, what happens to these mice when you get rid of their microbiome? And then go ahead and advance. Yep. And so what we get when we get rid of a microbiome in these mice is that we get what are called germ-free mice or germ-free animals. And we've studied this not only in germ-free mice, but germ-free pigs, germ-free cows, even germ-free humans, surprisingly. But what we know about germ-free mice and other germ-free animals is that they are nutritionally underdeveloped. They need to eat a lot more in order to get the basic nutrients out of the same foods as a colonized mouse. And so what that tells us is that our microbiome is really important for extracting nutrients out of food. The germ-free animals also have stunted immune systems, and so they're more susceptible to infections. And so again, what that tells us is our microbiome helps educate our immune system. And then, another major finding is that the germ-free animals have these neurologic deficits. They're anxious, they're hyperactive, they have learning and memory deficits. And that's a little bit surprising. Like, how is it that, the microbiome can influence the brain, right? Like it's a distal organ. Our microbes are usually in our gut. And that's really what I'm focusing on today, gut microbes. How is it that these microbes are affecting the brain? And I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. But, these are three of many ways in which the microbiome can influence the host, the well-being of mice and humans, really. And so because our microbiome does so many important things for us, then researchers like myself think about the microbiome as extending the capabilities of the host genome, and that they're kind of a second genome to our own genome. And if we understand the microbiome and the genes that they bring with them, then we can leverage that information to develop better therapies for patients. So go ahead and advance. So just microbiome by the numbers, there are tons of microbial cells on our skin, in our gut. Some people say there is as many microbial cells in and on us as our own human cells. Like the ratio is either a little bit more microbes than human cells or just as many microbial cells as human cells. And they bring a lot of genes with them. So for each one of our genes, they have 150 genes that they're bringing with them. So their genome is actually 150-fold larger than our own genome. And that's where we get to, take advantage of all the functions that they provide for us, because their genome can do things for us, like extract nutrients from food that we can't do for ourselves. Each one of us probably has around 100 to 150 unique microbes. And I'm going to say a little bit later about how each one of our microbiomes is very distinct. So the microbes that live in me are very different than the microbes that live in Emily and in you and in maybe your husband or your family member. And so each person's microbiome is very personalized. There's a tendency for people to talk about microbes as being good guys or bad guys. And that little warning triangle symbol down there is there to remind me to say, like, we really shouldn't talk about microbes in that way, because a microbe that's beneficial in one place, like in the gut, like if it goes into the bloodstream, it can become toxic or pathogenic or cause disease. And so it's all context dependent. Where that microbe is, what it's doing, the context really matters as to whether that microbe is doing something that is beneficial to the host, to us, or not. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there are microbes kind of all throughout the gastrointestinal tract and our airways and our mouth, but you can see the biggest percentage of microbes exist in the gut, in the GI tract. Go ahead and advance. So I talked about this phenomenon, how microbes in the gut can affect the brain. And so one of the ways that we think that microbes do this is by producing metabolites. These are small compounds, these are small chemicals that maybe exist in the gut. And because they're so small, it's really easy for them to move from the gut into the circulation, into the blood. And once those metabolites that are produced by our microbiome are in the blood, they can go to other sites like the heart, which is down there at the bottom of the slide, the heart, the liver, the brain, which is up there on the upper left-hand corner, as well as the gut. And in doing, these metabolites that are produced by the microbiome can affect all these organ systems and affect our well-being in that way. Next slide. Okay, so a key point to take away is each person's microbiome is highly personalized, and it's shaped by many factors. So on the left, I have a figure from one of my papers, actually, where I studied rheumatoid arthritis patients, and I looked at each patient and how that person's microbiome shifted with therapy. And so this is kind of like, you can think about it as a map. And on that map, each person's microbiome is in a different place on that map. That means their microbiomes are very different. And then how they responded to therapy, that's kind of, a line connecting a circle and a triangle. How that person's microbiome changed with therapy is also very different, right? And so kind of a key point here is everyone's microbiome is different, and how that person's microbiome responds to diet or therapy or some other intervention will also be personalized, will be unique. And so on the right-hand side of the slide, there are multiple factors that can influence your microbiome, the microbes that you're kind of born with or that you live with throughout the course of your life. And they include the way that you were born, how you were fed when you were an infant, the stresses that you may have experienced, the diet that you eat, the drugs that you're taking, where in the world you were born, and whether you're a young person or middle-aged person or someone who is old and wise. Next slide. All right, so there's going to be three kind of key points that I want to make in the time that I have. Number one, how you respond to a particular diet depends on your microbiome. And I'm going to show you the data kind of to support that. Next slide. So this is a cool study that came out in 2015. These are patients in Israel, and this is an Israeli research study group where they looked at 800 people and then had them wear smart devices, and these 800 people would come in regularly to measure a number of things, including their microbiome, blood tests. They filled out questionnaires. They kept a food diary. And what these investigators did was that they gave these patients standardized diets. So they gave them like a cookie that was all the same across the 800 people, or a banana that was all the same across 800 people. And then they looked at how each of these people responded to either a cookie or a banana or a whole meal. And so when they did that, they found some interesting results, which is that each person's response to the standardized diet interventions was very unique. And so an example of that is on the right hand side of the slide. So what is measured on the y-axis is the person's sugar level. And then on the x-axis on the bottom is just what happens to that sugar level over time. And then there's two people. There's one person at the top, participant 445, and then a second participant on the bottom, participant 644. And if I didn't look at this, if you had asked me ahead of time, like, okay, well, if we have these two people and we give them both a banana and a cookie, which of those, like the banana or the cookie, will cause a higher spike in sugars? And I would have said the cookie would cause a higher spike in sugars, right? And so what we see is, like, that's true for the person on the bottom, participant 644, has a higher spike in sugar with the cookie. But for the top patient, participant 445, that person actually has a higher spike in sugar with the banana. And that's really surprising. And so when the researchers kind of looked at this kind of for all 800 patients with all the standardized diets that they did, they kind of traced back and said, well, everybody's response to these diets is dependent on the microbiome as well as other things like their genetics. And so that, to me, really encapsulates the fact that each one of us responds differently to a diet intervention, and it's dependent on things like the microbiome and the host. Next slide. This has been borne out in mouse studies as well. This is a very old study, actually, where he took germ-free animals and colonized each group of mice with either microbes that came from a mouse that was on a high-fat diet, or microbes from mice that were on a low-fat diet. So these germ-free animals were exactly the same, genetically identical, but they had different were their microbes that were in their gut. And both of these groups of mice with different microbiomes were fed the same diet, low-fat diet, but the mice that had a microbiome, a high-fat microbiome diet, gained more weight. And so that's kind of really pointing to the microbiome as shaping, the way that these animals are gaining weight and extracting nutrients from food. So next slide. So those are two studies in humans and in mice showing that our microbiome really affects the way that we respond to a diet. And so, like, a lot of times I hear patients say, like, the keto diet worked for my patient, or the keto diet worked for my friend, but it's not working for me. Or, when we look at studies, the Mediterranean diet worked in one patient population, but not in another. Or, like, I sometimes have patients say, these foods trigger arthritis in me, but, like, I don't find that to be the case among my other, friends in my community that have arthritis. And to me, that makes sense in light of this information that, not everyone's going to have the same response. And what I then encourage my patients to do is to listen to their body when they are eating something and they notice that it's affecting them. Pay attention to that. That's real. And so, I guess the take home there is make sure you're listening to your body. Next slide. All right. So listen to your body. Number 2. This is something that I feel very confident about saying, which is to avoid foods that are known to increase inflammation. So can you advance the slide one more time? Oh, actually, can you go back? So these burgers, fries, pizza, those are so tasty. They've been engineered to smell good and feel good in your mouth and taste delicious, but they're terrible for your microbiome, and they're terrible for any kind of inflammatory disease. Next slide. And this is really important because Americans eat a lot of ultra-processed foods and high-fat foods. And so that was the study showing that, like, for the average American, almost 60% of our calories come from ultra-processed foods, and only 30% come from minimally processed or unprocessed foods. And this has actually come up in the news recently. A New York Times article revisited this idea about ultra-processed foods. And so, one of the pieces of advice that I give to my patients is, try to eat foods that don't have an ingredients label. So those are the foods that are kind of, the fruits and vegetables, or the meats, or the dairies, the things that are kind of on the periphery of a supermarket are usually unprocessed or minimally processed. And then if you're eating something that has a ingredients label, if it has a bunch of ingredients on there that you don't recognize, that's an ultra processed food, and that's something you kind of want to avoid eating. Next slide. And so ultra processed foods, they're not exactly the same thing as high fat foods, but both of those categories of foods are generally bad. And there's a lot of data showing that high-fat diets make everything worse. High-fat diets increase your risk of stroke, of heart attack, depression, liver disease, sleep apnea, all of these things that are on this slide, including arthritis, which is all the way at the bottom, are made worse by a high-fat diet. Next slide. And so, here's data to support that. On the left-hand side of this slide, I'm showing, again, this kind of microbiome map space where the investigators looked at the microbiome of mice fed either a high-fat diet or a carbohydrate diet, so high-fat in red, carbohydrate in blue. And what you can see is that the microbiome of these mice really differs depending on the diet, supporting the idea that the diet shapes the microbiome. And then on the right-hand side of this slide, the mice that were given a high-fat diet, if they also had arthritis, their arthritis was worse on the high-fat diet. And so that's kind of supporting the idea that like high-fat diet and ultra-processed foods can lead to worse arthritis. Next slide. Here's another study showing that. I just wanted to find like as many studies supporting this idea that diet can make arthritis worse, and you want to avoid like a high-fat diet. So next slide. This is another mouse model where high-fat diet in red led to worse arthritis than a regular diet, again in mice. Next slide. Okay, so this is data, supported by data that you want to avoid foods that are known to exacerbate inflammation and inflammatory disease. And I'm pretty sure every doctor, dietitian, integrative health specialist will agree on this advice. Next slide. Now, the advice that I find more challenging to give is I can tell you what not to eat, but I can't tell you what to eat. That is harder to figure out because everyone's microbiome is so different. And so kind of the advice that I give to my patients is try to increase the diversity of foods that you eat. And when you increase the diversity of foods that you eat, you're increasing the amount of good nutrients, trace nutrients that are in that food. And that's going to benefit both you, your own cells, as well as your microbiome cells. And I make a little disclaimer here that like I don't have evidence for this recommendation, but a lot of experts kind of agree on this is expert guidance. Next slide. So if you go online and you like search anti-inflammatory diet, you'll see a lot of them. So Dr. Wales is an anti-inflammatory diet. ANRF has suggestions about anti-inflammatory diet. And Monica Guma, who's down at UCSD, has published an itis diet that is meant to improve our inflammatory, a diet that's meant for patients with inflammatory disease. And they're all like slightly different, but like the common general principle there is that you want to stick to lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, pasta, beans and legumes, and you want to have a diversity of unprocessed foods. And if you're eating processed foods, make them like in small quantities, right? You still need to enjoy life, right? But there's another author called Michael Pollan, and he has a saying like eat food, right? Real food, not like processed food, not too much, mostly plants. And that's kind of good advice that I like to share with my patients. Next slide. Now, I find it really hard to eat fruits and vegetables because they're not nicely packed and they're not made to look beautiful like the way that processed foods are. So companies have figured it out. They know how to attract us to those foods. And so we have to kind of put into work to like pack snacks throughout the day. So I find strategies that are helpful for me is to pack snacks that are easy for me to throw into my backpack or into my bag. And they include things that'll hold up over the day. So like cucumbers, apples, dried fruits, nuts, some cheese can go in there. And then when I'm at home, sometimes I don't have ready access to like fresh fruits and vegetables. But frozen vegetables are great because they're usually picked at the sort of prime of the season, and then you can kind of store them and then you can add them to your pasta sauce. And so I'm kind of saying these things because we have to find ways to make it easy to do the right thing. And I find that like doing these things helps it make it easy to do the right thing and eat the right kinds of foods. Next slide. The other thing is that when I talk to my patients about diet and the microbiome, I kind of try to remind them to be mindful about their eating, like smell your food, pay attention to the colors, take time eating that food, really appreciate all the tastes that are in your mouth, the smells that are coming into your nose. And I love waking up in the mornings and like cutting up some fruit, right in the morning because that wakes me up and it smells so good. And I'm like really excited to eat that fruit for the rest of the day. And so I'm not going to go through all of these here, but these are really good strategies to enjoy the food that you're eating and also have a better relationship with food and like not feel guilty about eating what you're eating. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to end here. Hopefully I've not taken up too much time and we can have the next speaker speak, but 3 main lessons. You know, each person's microbiome is different. How they respond to the diet is different, and we need better personalized nutrition for patients with rheumatic disease. Really try to avoid highly processed foods and high-fat diets. That'll really make you feel better overall, and in general, we find that that helps my patients with arthritis, and then try to increase the diversity of foods that you eat. Next slide. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I also put, this is again from the ANRF website, you know, find inspiration among your peers. A lot of people have good ideas and you want to hear about how to eat well from us and also the people around you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nayak, and thank you for those tips and that wonderful presentation. We'll have time at the end for questions for Dr. Nayak and for Dr. Millman. So please make sure to type those questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to those. We'll leave plenty of time. But I'm so very thrilled to welcome Dr. Jasmine Francis Millman. She is joining us all the way from Australia today. I won't even have her tell you how early it is. Dr. Millman is a Senior Scientific Affairs Associate at Swiss Wellness. She's a medical research scientist and scientific reviewer with broad-ranging experience in basic and clinical research, as well as clinical and community dietetics. So we're so thrilled to have her. Welcome, Dr. Millman.
Hi everyone, very nice to be here, and yeah, it is pretty early. It's 5:30 a.m. where I'm currently located, which is just outside of Melbourne. Yeah, so if there are any issues with my accent or words I might say that are more in kind of Australian speak, then just let me know and I'll translate. So today I'll be talking to you about the gut arthritis connection and really kind of diving into what you can do from a diet perspective to potentially help with symptom management, and that being by modifying or helping those good microbes to flourish. So next slide. So this is just a bit of an overview of things I'll be talking about today. So I'll just go through a bit of an intro and touch on that gut arthritis connection, which Dr. Nayak has done seamlessly, and then go and delve into the role of the gut in inflammation, specifically chronic inflammation, talk about what's out there in terms of evidence for different diets in helping with arthritis. And most of the focus will be on practical strategies and tips to help with eating a healthy diet that is good, hopefully for your arthritis symptoms, and then just ending with some take homes. Next slide. So this is just a bit of an intro of who I am, which I think Emily already conveyed. So I have a background in clinical and community dietetics, and actually primarily worked with Indigenous people in Australia, in remote communities as well as in cities. And then I did a PhD and worked as a postdoc in Japan, Okinawa, looking at the impact of certain functional foods on the gut microbiome. And then now I'm working for Swiss, and I'm actually wearing my dietitian hat today. I'm not doing this on behalf of the company that I work for. Next slide. Okay, so I guess you all know now that Dr. Nayak has taken you through this, but obviously, there is a connection between the gut microbiome and arthritis. Obviously, arthritis is a condition of chronic joint inflammation, and we know that the gut is home to lots and lots of microbes, and some of these are helpful and some of these are harmful. what researchers found that there is a close relationship between the gut and the immune system, and this is what facilitates that connection between the gut and the joints in arthritis. In research that has come out, what has been found is that there tends to be an imbalance in certain gut microbes, and that almost comes before symptoms of arthritis. This is talking more about research in animal models, and also that inflammation in the gut, which is brought on by a host of different factors, which I'll talk to you about, can lead to widespread inflammation in the body. And obviously, rheumatoid arthritis is an inflammatory condition. What's also seen is that in those people with arthritis, there tends to be a reduction in the amount of gut microbes we have, and also certain strains that have been shown to be more prevalent in those with arthritis, and specifically in animal models, this has been shown. So next slide. So the gut and chronic inflammation, what is this story? Well, there, as I just touched on before, there are a variety of factors that can cause inflammation in the gut. Some of these include things like excess weight and obesity, a diet high in those nasty ultra-processed foods, which are so tasty, but bad for us. And what these kinds of factors can do is that they can cause inflammation in the gut via compromising our gut barrier. So perhaps you know, perhaps you don't know, this is just a figure of our gut cells, and what actually can happen when we consume, say, for instance, these ultra-processed foods chronically. This can actually lead to damaging our gut, the gut cells that line our gut, and can influence and almost damage some of these proteins that are in the middle here, called tight junction proteins. And that kind of makes our gut become more permeable to certain food particles, even certain types of bacteria and toxins. And then that can get into the bloodstream and lead to inflammation around the body. But this can also affect the gut cells directly as well, causing inflammation in the gut cells themselves. So it is important that we want to try and maintain not only a healthy gut microbiome, but also thinking about the cells that line our gut and the important role that they play in absorption of nutrients and what kind of comes across the gut into the bloodstream, and therefore into other parts of the body. So just touched on before as well, obviously, we see certain increases in kinds of pathogenic bacteria in arthritis, and this leads to inflammatory responses in the body, but also there has been perhaps a consensus or an understanding that in a lot of inflammatory diseases, there is a compromised gut barrier as well. Another point perhaps to touch on is that in arthritis patients, but more so in animal models, this has been shown, there's a reduction in certain types of beneficial bacteria. I'm not going to confuse you with the names of them, but Some of these actually produce what we call short chain fatty acids, and these are basically a byproduct of when we eat fiber. So in our gut, when we consume high fiber foods, that fiber actually gets fermented by some of these good bacteria. And as a byproduct, they produce these fatty acids called short chain fatty acids. And these fatty acids actually are really beneficial for the body because they have a lot of anti-inflammatory functions in the body. They actually provide fuel for our gut cells, helping to keep them really healthy and functioning well. And they also have a role to play in maintaining that barrier integrity, specifically those tight junction proteins that help hold the gut cells together and dictate what kind of goes in and out. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Next slide, please. So in terms of evidence for arthritis and what can be done from a dietary perspective, as Dr. Nayak touched on, you know, it is a personalized thing, but some studies do hint at certain kinds of diets being more beneficial than others. And there's obviously some other factors that need to be addressed as well if there are other things going on in addition to arthritis that might be making it worse. So first of all, if there is a tendency to have excess weight, then obviously that's something that could be influencing inflammatory status in the body and maybe even putting more pressure on joints, etc. So making sure that we try and maintain a healthy weight if that is a problem for you. Management of things like your blood cholesterol, blood pressure and blood sugar levels is also important too, because all of these things can influence inflammatory status in the body and just make us generally feel worse. Where most of the evidence is at in terms of certain diets that help with arthritis symptom management would be those anti-inflammatory diets like the Mediterranean diet, and any kind of diet that is more, that emphasizes more plant-based foods as well. Obviously, this is really good for our gut microbiome because these diets are very high in fiber, and that results in the short chain fatty acid production that I spoke about, helping with our gut cells and our gut lining, but also these short chain fatty acids having a widespread function in our body in terms of acting like anti-inflammatory agents. And then in these diets as well, they really emphasize healthy fats. So healthy fats come from foods like your fatty fish, like salmon, tuna, etc., but also plant-based fats like extra virgin olive oil, which contains also polyphenols. And both of these types of oils are very anti-inflammatory, but with the extra virgin olive oil, they also contain polyphenols. So polyphenols are chemical compounds that are found in a variety of coloured fruits and veggies, beans, and obviously extra virgin olive oil. And they're what gives food its colour, but also its really pungent flavour as well. And research is now showing that these polyphenols can actually almost act like a fertilizer for our gut microbiome and help the good bacteria to flourish and almost have some effects on helping to reduce the bad bacteria as well in our gut. And next slide. Okay, so some practical diet tips I thought I'd touch on. So if we want to adopt more of the anti-inflammatory Mediterranean style diet, basically we want to be emphasizing whole, unprocessed, mostly plant-based foods at every meal, and especially vegetables and those legumes and beans, because they're the ones that contain the most fiber and lots of those really wonderful polyphenols as well that help to really nourish your gut and feed it, and then have some really lovely beneficial effects for your whole body, including your joints, hopefully. And I know that for some of you, thinking about having to cut out a whole heap of those yummy ultra processed foods maybe sounds scary, but I really like to use the idea of crowding in rather than cutting out. So crowding in your diet with all of these really lovely, healthy, wholesome plant-based foods, and really elevating your cooking skills and repertoire, and hopefully that can become a bit of a hobby. And then naturally these other ultra processed foods will fall out, and you'll kind of maybe stop craving them so much as well the more you adopt this kind of diet. Another point to emphasize is avoiding eating too much at meal times and unnecessary snacking. So this can lead to excess weight gain, but also can wreak havoc on our blood sugar levels, for instance, and that can trigger certain inflammatory processes in the body as well. We want to try and opt for water and have no to low calorie beverages. So if you're going to drink things like tea and coffee, maybe trying not to add sugars, etc. to it. Obviously reducing or trying to avoid those ultra processed foods. So that really refers to any kind of packaged food with quite a number of ingredients that are obviously not found in nature the way nature intended. And this actually includes artificial sweeteners. So I know that this is a little bit of a controversial topic, but research does now show that some of these artificial sweeteners are actually not very good for our gut. So it's probably best to steer clear of them if you can. Another tip is to opt for savory over sweet meals. And I know that for a lot of us, we might like to have a sweet breakfast, but having a savory breakfast means that you can probably incorporate more veggies, more legumes, and that's probably going to stabilize your blood sugars better as well. So maybe making you not feel as hungry soon after eating. And another tip, and what is part of these Mediterranean style diets or anti-inflammatory diets, is to be adding some really good fats to your meals. So like they do in the Mediterranean regions, is adding extra virgin olive oil to your meals. And it's recommended in the Mediterranean diet to have 2 to 3 tablespoons per day of extra virgin olive oil. I know that sounds like a lot of fat, but if you're eating all of these whole foods and not these ultra processed foods, that's okay in terms of the calories that you're going to be taking in. Another really great food to emphasize in the diet are fermented foods. So these are things like your kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and these foods are a source of good bacteria, and these help to replenish some of those good microbes as well in your gut. We want to also be regularly consuming those omega-3s that come from foods like fatty fish, and if not, you can eat certain plant-based alternatives like flaxseed oil. And then also there's certain supplements that may be helpful or supportive, but it's best to check with your healthcare provider. Some of these include krill oil, boswellia, curcumin, and type 2 collagen. Next slide. Okay, so this is a bit of an example of some meals that might be good to have for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and then there's just a few notes down here. Hopefully everybody can read that. But basically, this picture with the plate, that's a really good example of what your plate should look like on this kind of eating plan or dietary pattern. So we want to try and aim for half of our plate to be vegetables. Then we want to aim for around a quarter to be some kind of carbohydrate. And for that carbohydrate or, starch, grain to be whole grain. We want to also have some lean protein in there. So a small portion of, say, fish, for example. We want to be adding the extra virgin olive oil to our meal as well. And then they've got some pictures of some fruits and some nuts in there, as well as some yogurt or cheese. And these can be obviously added to your plate or your meal or be eaten as a snack. All right, next slide. Okay, so just some of the take homes to finish off. There's obviously imbalances in the gut microbiome in a number of inflammatory conditions, including arthritis, and this can trigger both inflammation in the gut as well as inflammation in the whole body. Mediterranean and plant-based diets seem to be the best in terms of symptom management. And it's really important to focus on maintaining a healthy weight, not eating too much, choosing those whole foods, and really emphasizing those high fiber foods. And make sure you're consuming those fatty fish and extra virgin olive oil, those good fats. And if you can, add a bit of a daily serve of those fermented foods too to help with those good bacteria. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Millman. Thank you to both you and Dr. Nayak for those wonderful presentations. We'll now open the floor for some questions from our audience, and a few have come in, so I will go through some of those. So for both of you, how can I incorporate microbiome-friendly foods into my diet without causing flare-ups or exacerbating symptoms of my arthritis? What's the easiest way to incorporate those? And I'll let both of you answer. So Renuka, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I was wondering who should answer first, but yeah, we'll leave it to you. You're much more of an expert in arthritis, so yeah. Anyway,
I feel like when patients ask me this, it kind of goes back to that advice about listen to your body. And what you don't want to do is do a whole big new set of new foods. Maybe incorporate one food and eliminate a high fat food, eliminate one or two high fat foods and incorporate, one or two fruits or vegetables that you normally don't go to, and then see how that makes you feel. There are some people who think that nightshades cause their arthritis to get worse, or certain kinds of foods make their arthritis get worse, and that's possible, so that's where you kind of want to, listen to your body. But if you're kind of doing a big change in your diet and you get a flare, you don't know whether that was, which one of the things in your diet might have contributed, or whether it was something else entirely, right? Because a lot of things can cause arthritis flares. So, it's kind of just like with medicine too, add one medicine at a time, go, start slow, go low, start slow. Something is what I usually advise. I don't know if Dr. Millman has more that she might add to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And yeah, I think it's really important to be listening to your body and your unique needs. And one thing that can actually happen, and this isn't so much related to the symptom flare up, but if we go from a diet that's really high in those ultra processed foods and then suddenly adopt a diet that's ridiculously high in fiber, we can have a lot of discomfort in our gut. And it takes some time for your body to get used to this new way of eating. So that's important to be mindful of that. And yeah, like just kind of making those gradual changes and sort of building yourself up to, you know, that ideal diet rather than, okay, tomorrow I'm going to just do everything, but I've started from this place. So yeah, just listen to your body and its unique needs, and it's much more, I guess, manageable to do things in a way that, you know, you're gradually implementing changes rather than trying to do everything at once. It's probably not something that's going to be as easy to stick to. Thanks.
Absolutely. So next question, we'll start with Dr. Millman on this one. Are there any specific dietary changes or supplements that have been shown to have a significant impact on improving gut health and managing your autoimmune conditions?
Yep. So the first part was sorry, I couldn't hear properly. The first part was the diet.
Yes, any specific dietary changes or supplements that have been shown to have significant impact.
Yep. So dietary changes, I would suggest emphasizing those foods that are high in fiber, because they're going to be good for your gut microbiome. So things like, you know, your fruits and veggies and your legumes, and they are leading to the production of those short chain fatty acids, which can have a beneficial effect in your body, and that may then have, you know, a beneficial effect on your joints. But also emphasizing those healthy fats in the diet. So your omega-3 fatty acids coming from your fatty fish. They're also found in certain seeds and nuts as well. And then your extra virgin olive oil too. So that actually contains certain compounds within it that can actually help with pain or pain sensation. So if you're consuming these kinds of foods, this may help with symptom management. But then also there are certain types of supplements, which I spoke about in my slides, that can potentially be helpful. So some of these include krill oil, curcumin, boswellia, and type 2 collagen. But I think rather than recommend these, it's best to speak with your healthcare provider and your unique needs, because there can be some interactions with certain medications or what have you. And I think that they're an add-on to first adopting a healthy diet rather than completely relying on them. Yeah. Sure. If you want to go, Dr. Nayak.
Yeah, I was just going to add one other thing that, you know, it's not a supplement, vitamin D. We always check for that because a lot of our patients are low in vitamin D, and then we like prescribe that as a supplement. So, you know, like, and that can, when you're deficient in vitamin D, some patients have worsened pain and arthritis. And so we find that that's helpful. And I think studies have shown that as well. And maybe just related to that, sometimes B12 as a vitamin or supplement that when it's low, it's good to kind of to bring that back into normal. Both of those also you can go overboard with that. So, you know, I kind of advise my patients too, like you don't need a whole lot of these things. You just need those numbers for vitamin D or B12 to be in the normal range.
Fantastic. So starting with Dr. Nayak for this one, how long does it typically take to see improvements in symptoms after making changes to support a healthy microbiome? You know, what should I expect sort of during that adjustment period?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. The microbiome itself, studies have shown that if you change diet, the microbiome itself can change within a matter of a few days. So, and the microbiome will change really quickly. Now, the arthritis and the state of inflammation in your body, that, in my experience, takes longer. And, you know, I usually say give it 3 to 6 months. For medicines, I would say 3 to 6 months for any dietary changes as well, to know whether that's working for you or not. But that's kind of a, you know, it's not evidence-based, it's based on my experience. Yeah.
Dr. Millman, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, Dr. Nayak. And yeah, I think that also if you're looking at adopting this new way of eating and seeing how it might affect your symptoms over a period of 3 to 6 months, it's also a really good opportunity to for that to become like your new lifestyle as well. And that's important that we have consistency and we're able to maintain it over a long period of time. Yeah.
Okay, final question, and we'll start with Dr. Millman on this one. What foods or combinations provide a good source of short chain fatty acids?
Yeah. So everybody probably learnt this from my slides, but it's basically those high fiber foods. So your whole grain cereals, your vegetables and your legumes. So I emphasize the vegetables and legume component more because sometimes when we're having too much grainy, starchy type food, that can wreak havoc on our blood sugar levels if we're not careful, for some people anyway. But also the others contain pretty good sources of the polyphenols. So anything that's really high in fiber, nuts are also a good source of fiber too, tree nuts, and they contain a lot of those healthy fats as well. So yeah, opt for those plant foods that are high in fiber, and that's hopefully going to help with the short chain fatty acid production in your body.
Fantastic. Dr. Nayak, anything you would add to that?
No, that was great.
Well, fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you once again to Dr. Millman, Dr. Nayak for these fantastic presentations. And I think certainly for me, some great takeaways and kind of useful tips to start incorporating into my diet. And I want to just thank again our strategic partner, Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine, for their support of this presentation. We're still at the very beginning of Arthritis and Lupus Awareness Month, so please do look for these other opportunities coming your way. Monday will be a special webinar featuring many scholars and many former recipients of our grants talking about the future of treatment. And then following that on May 22nd will be our last webinar. And that's about managing your mindset. Obviously, dealing with the mental health aspects of living with an autoimmune disease can be challenging. So please make sure to sign up for both of those and stay tuned as we bring you more information as well. And again, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. And if you would like to make a gift to support groundbreaking research, please visit curearthritis.org/donate. We thank you so much for your time and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.